was your first instrument and when did you start playing?
First instrument, I think I was about 15. Okay, this is my favorite joke. I started out as a drummer and then I became a musician. I never get tired of that one. Sorry, drummers. So yeah, that was it. I worked road construction all summer long, saved up, and that's what I spent my money on. Was a drum kit, and it was the electronic style because this was like mid '80s. Whenever you had the do sound that was so in vogue, and I had to have that. My parents were all for it because it came with headphones. So that was really where it all sort of started, and it was a great time to be playing that sort of music. And that was really where it started, and kind of helped me in more ways than I realized at the time. Because shortly after that, I moved into an apartment and I couldn't have a drum kit. So I gathered everything up and I took it to a music store, and he said, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but people don't really dig those sounds anymore. And I said, okay, so what do I do? He said, well, I'll trade you for a guitar. And that was how it happened. So he pulled an acoustic guitar off the shelf, handed it to me. I left my drum kit behind, and the rest was more or less history for me as I became just sort of enamored and engrossed in guitar playing, various styles and everything, and that's never stopped. It's been going ever since.
So why did you stick with guitar? Why not go to a different instrument? What was it about the guitar that made you say, I'm going to stick with this?
When you're when you're graduate high school in 1985, and that was like the hair metal, heavy band years. It was everywhere. Acoustic intros were in vogue. Everybody had it. The beginning of the song always started with an acoustic guitar. And I was always like, oh wow, that's really cool. That's very textured and very deep. And then they would sing about getting drunk and other things. So it was really that was the time to be playing guitar. Joe Satriani's Surfing with the Alien came out somewhere around 1987. So you had the stuff that was getting played on the radio, and that carried me in that direction, for electric guitar and being sort of enamored with all the instrumental guitarists. And then probably when I was 19 or 20, I went to see Michael Hedges at the Majestic Theater in Dallas, Texas. I'm not even sure if it's still open anymore, but he was on the Windham Hill label. It was steel string, alternate tuning stuff. He was completely different than anything I had ever heard. And I just sat there. I'm sure there were tears streaming down my face. I'd never heard anything like that. I'd never witnessed anything that powerful and that musical in my entire life. And I set the electric guitar down and didn't pick it up for another 20 years. And so the next, 2 decades were nothing but steel string, alternate tuning. And I think that was the flexibility someone like me needed. Because I can do whatever I want with this instrument. I can drop this string down to a D. I can drop this string here and this string here. And the next thing you know, you strum this and you have something that's completely foreign to someone who plays in standard tuning, which I'd already done. So that was it. It was him that really changed my life. And of course, from there, there were other guitarists. A lot of it was on Windham Hill and Narada and some of the other labels that were really sort of running the instrumental, ambient, acoustic, new age scene. And once you're in that, as I think we all know, once you have the bug, it doesn't go anywhere, and you just get deeper and deeper into it, and you become more and more comfortable with your own voice. And so it's a journey, man. It just is.
In addition to being a great guitarist, you're also this phenomenal engineer. I mean, you've done projects for C.A.R.E, for Doug, for David Donner. I mean, you've done pretty much all of the Heart Dance releases. When did you realize you were good at mixing and mastering?
Well, flattery gets you everywhere, so thank you for that. I was the guy that would take the time to learn to use the 4-track when I was in college, playing in bands and things like that. And I always had an interest. It's like, wow, this music is awesome, but how do they do this? How do they make this? How do you mix a record? How do you where does all this stuff come from? So I kind of had a roommate that worked at a music store, and he was always bringing gadgets, to our house and everything. I assume it was on loan from the store. Looking back on it, I'm not sure about that. But so I had my hands in MIDI and sequencing with Commodore 128s, way back when. I'll tell you what that is after the interview, Jonah. So no, the idea of having sequencers and being able to program something on a computer screen and then hit a space bar and all of a sudden the sound is coming out of this keyboard here. That was just, that was mind-blowing at the time. And so I always had an interest in how things were done. I'm not the most technical person. I didn't want to tear it apart and rebuild it. I'm not really, I'm not somebody who's going to build their own mixing board. I am an end user, but I'm fascinated by the sounds. And so I just think it sort of picked me. And, when I started, I just sort of seemed to have a knack for it, and people liked what I did. And when you want to get hired, that's fairly important. So, you start out small, doing little projects. Eventually you get up the nerve to ask, to send somebody an invoice, even though you're a friend. And they're like, yeah, or they'll go try somewhere else and they'll come back. And they're like, I tried going to a real studio and I like what you did better. And so, it's going back, quite a few years at this point. But I just love it. And when it's something that, you're that drawn to, then it just takes on a life of its own, and you just get sucked further and further into it, and your interests expand and your knowledge expands, and eventually it just becomes second nature, and there's not a lot of thought that goes into it. You just simply react to what's in front of you and try to follow a vision of some sort.
So what's a bigger compliment for you? An artist receiving a mix and then raving about it, or someone who listens to something you put guitar on and say, God, like this changed my life? Which one is a bigger compliment for you?
It's all parts of everything. It really is. I've always seemed to maintain a few different identities, and there's often not a lot of crossover there. I mean, there are people that know me as an engineer and have no idea that I play an instrument. That's where they found me. There's people that know me as an acoustic guitarist and have no idea that I own several electric guitars and I play them on records. And there's people that have no idea that I'm a bass player. And there's people that know me as this or that, and I don't fight it. It used to kind of bother me. Once you start getting into, once you go pro, as they say, and this becomes what you do. You're like, okay, well, is this going to be confusing to people? Well, are my hip hop guys going to hear, my ambient work and think this is what I do? So how do I sort of juggle all this? And my answer was just don't worry about it. So it's all flattering. Anytime anybody likes anything that I do, I just, I think it's the highest form of compliment, and it keeps me going.
Speaking of Don, you took lessons with Don, guitar lessons. How was it, you just mastered his last project, how was it reconnecting in that sense? Like, what is that like for you?
Oh, it's a treat. That's a funny story about how I actually met Don. Whenever I decided I was going to be a pro musician, I had to accept the fact that I really didn't know anything a pro musician is supposed to know. So I'd been playing a long time, but I'd buy these books and I'd read them and they didn't make any sense, or they were all kind of in standard notation, which is not something someone like me really knows how to read very well. So there was a book that was called, I believe if I get the title right, but it was Progressive, it was Theory for the Progressive Guitarist or Progressive Theory for the Contemporary Guitarist. Something like that. They were all over Guitar Center. So I started reading the book and I'm like, this really makes sense. I get it. I don't know who this guy is, but he sure explains things directly to me. And I dog-eared the thing. I still have it. It's probably in my studio right now, and I've still referred to it. So I'm sitting there one day and I'm thinking, man, it sure would be nice to study with someone like this. And I bothered to read the back. It was about the author. And it's like, Don C.A.R.E is from Michigan originally, blah, 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 blah. He resides in Eugene, Oregon, which was about an hour and 45 minutes from my house at the time. So I picked up the phone and called and left a message, and Don called me back and he said, well, what can I help you with? And I introduced myself and I said, well, I've been playing guitar for most of my life and I don't have the slightest idea what I'm doing. And he got silent and he kind of chuckled and he said, well, I think I can help you with that. And so from that point forward, I spent an entire summer, once a week, driving down on Wednesday to spend time in Don's studio and learning from him. And there wasn't that much actual guitar playing. It was all, me learning theory. And I'd always show up with a list of questions. Why does this work here? How does this work here? And he was just able to explain it exactly in a way that someone like me could understand it. And that's not changed. I mean, every time we're together, I still have lots of questions for him. But now I had started my professional engineering career around the same time, even though I'd been doing it as a side business for a long time. you know, he's like, oh, you master records? And I said, yeah. He's like, I've got this record. I've done everything I can do with it. You want to take a shot at it? And I said, sure. You know, I mean, I hadn't really worked on anything that was musically that good at that point. You know, because when you start out, who's really going to trust some guy with their record? You know, when you don't really have a track record. But, you know, he's like, yeah, well, see what you can do with it. And he was pleased with it. And so that sort of, you know, that took our relationship, you know, beyond teacher, engineer, into friendship. And we've just, you know, have stayed in touch. And I get to hear all the stuff that he's doing, and I let him know what I'm doing. And so, yeah, now that he's retired, he's been to Arizona a couple of times since then. And it's just a treat to get to see him. We just, you know, we're old friends at this point. And so we still talk about the same things we talked about then. But, you know, our kids are older now, and you know, he's retired, and someday I will think about doing that. So it's just always, it's a great time. But that's what this business does, is you end up having multifaceted relationships. You know, it might start off professionally, but you end up, you know, getting to know people, whether it's through their art or through conversations or through just being around them. And that's the really cool part of what I get to do.
When it's all said and done, and you take a look back at your life, what would you like your legacy to be in regards to music? When people look at your catalog from things you've mixed, things you performed on, what do you want to be the takeaway from that?
You know, I think that was just a musical guy. I think I could be satisfied with that. You know, as long as it had something to do with music, he always wanted to have his hands in it, and that's enough. That's enough for me.